Ambassador Jack Calloway stood alone in the center of the Galactic Council chamber, his sharp blue eyes scanning the assembled representatives of a dozen species. The air was thick with the artificial scent of oxygen recyclers, and the polished obsidian floor reflected the cold light of the data streams flowing across the curved walls. He had been here before, standing in this exact spot, issuing the same warning. And, like before, he was met with thinly veiled amusement. High Chancellor Virkau of the Zorvith Dominion, a towering insectoid with crystalline eyes, clicked his mandibles in something resembling condescension. Ambassador Calloway, your species has a well-documented proclivity for dramatics. The Zervash are an inconvenience, yes, but hardly the apocalyptic force you describe. Calloway exhaled through his nose, suppressing the surge of irritation pressing against his patience. They took out the Tarquin in a single engagement. That was a fleet of nearly 200 warships, gone in under 5 minutes. We recovered the distress signal. They weren't just defeated. They were erased. A low murmur spread through the chamber, but it was the kind of idle chatter exchanged by people who had already made up their minds. Calloway glanced at the large display behind him, where a tactical projection played in looping silence. Zervash vessels striking like phantoms, cutting through the Tarquin fleet with weapons that left no debris, no survivors. He turned his attention to a smaller screen on his wrist. A single tap sent the full data package to the entire chamber. Human exaggeration, scoffed Minister Kaldor of the Rulon Confederacy, his broad reptilian features set in what passed for a smirk. You claim to know their capabilities, yet your own people have never fought them directly. Calloway held the gaze of every counselor he could. We didn't need to. We listened. Admiral Wyatt Grissom, sitting rigid at the Earth delegation station, finally spoke. His voice was the low, steady drawl of a man who had seen war and had no illusions about it. We intercepted Zervash comms over a year ago. They've been waging a slow, methodical extermination of every species they deem an obstacle. They don't negotiate, they don't occupy, they annihilate. And if you're waiting for them to show you mercy, you'll be waiting in a debris field. Silence fell across the room, but Calloway could already see the weight of their words dissipating under centuries of arrogance. The Zervash had never openly threatened the Council itself, and for civilizations that had held dominion over their star systems for millennia, complacency was a comfortable habit. They were powerful, yes, but power meant nothing if it was aimed in the wrong direction. The finality of the situation settled in his chest like a stone. He had seen it before in every briefing with men like Grissom, in every hushed conversation between engineers and physicists who were already working on what came next. Earth had never been the most advanced species, nor the strongest. But when backed into a corner, they adapted. The Council, in its infinite arrogance, believed strength came from heritage, from millennia of dominance. Earth had no such luxury. They had clawed their way into space on nothing but raw ingenuity and the knowledge that the universe would never hand them a place at the table. They had to take it. Calloway gathered his breath and delivered his final words with the weight of inevitability. You don't have to believe me, but when the Zervash come for you, and they will, don't expect Earth to clean up your mess. He turned without another word, Grissom standing alongside him as they strode out of the chamber. Back aboard the USS Valiant, orbiting the Galactic Council station, Dr. Miguel Sanchez was already waiting for them in the briefing room. The scientist's dark eyes flicked between holographic displays of energy readouts and tactical reports. Beside him, Chief Engineer David Brick Reynolds sat with arms crossed, his massive frame taking up an unreasonable amount of space in the already cramped room. They laughed you out, didn't they? Sanchez said without looking up. Calloway poured himself a measure of whiskey from a side cabinet and downed it without hesitation. Wouldn't call it laughing. More like watching children ignore a fire alarm because their house hasn't burned down yet. Reynolds grunted. Figures. Bureaucrats never listen till it's too late. Grissom leaned against the table, studying the Zervash fleet formations on the display. It's too late for talk anyway. We've got confirmation. They hit the outer defense grid an hour ago. Council forces barely put up a fight. Calloway closed his eyes, the weight of it pressing against his skull. Casualties? Sanchez exhaled. Total. Their fleet was vaporized in seconds. Silence stretched between them. Then Reynolds cracked his knuckles and stood. Good. Means they won't be in our way. Sanchez shot him a look. You're disturbingly comfortable with this. Reynolds shrugged. We knew it was coming. Now we stop waiting. Project Olympus is ready to deploy. Hayes has cyber warfare teams running final tests. Ford's prepping for combat trials on the Washington. And Cole's Marines are on standby. Grissom nodded. And you're sure the quantum tunneling drive can handle live combat maneuvers? Sanchez rubbed his temples. Theoretically, yes. But we don't have field data. We'd be the first species to fight this way. Calloway placed his glass down with a sharp clink. Then we make sure we're the last species the Zervash ever fight. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Grissom straightened and tapped his comm. Prep the fleet. The command center aboard the USS Washington was bathed in the cold glow of holographic projections, each displaying layers of incoming data, enemy fleet movements, and operational schematics. Admiral Wyatt Grissom stood at the center, arms crossed, expression grim as he studied the Zervash advance. They weren't slowing. If anything, they were accelerating. Dr. Miguel Sanchez paced beside the main console, muttering calculations under his breath while rapidly typing commands into the system. Theoretically, the quantum displacement drive should allow us to evade direct fire, but I'm still concerned about energy output. If we push too hard, we could burn out half the reactor before we fire a single shot. Chief Engineer David Brick Reynolds sat at the secondary console, thick fingers drumming against the metal. It won't matter how much juice we have if our weapons don't hit where it hurts. I ran the numbers. Zervash hulls aren't just reinforced, they're adaptive. Standard kinetic rounds won't do a damn thing after the first volley. Lieutenant Commander Malcolm Hayes leaned against the far wall, eyes locked on the holographic readouts. Then we don't give them time to adapt, he said, voice level. Hit them fast, hit them hard, and make sure they never see it coming. Sanchez scoffed. That's assuming they aren't running countermeasures against us already. We don't know if they've even encountered quantum warfare before. Captain Eli Ford, standing at the pilot station, shot him a smirk. Then let's be the first to show them what it looks like. The proximity alarms pulsed once. Zervash scouts had entered sensor range. The time for debate was over. Grissom straightened. We launch. Now. The bridge erupted into movement. Ford slid into the pilot's chair, fingers dancing over the controls as the Washington shuddered beneath them. A low hum reverberated through the hull as the quantum displacement drive charged. All systems green, Reynolds confirmed, voice a rumble of controlled aggression. Grissom activated the tactical overlay, magnifying the Zervash formation. 3 Vanguard ships, sleek and obsidian, moved like hunting predators through the void. They had no reason to suspect Earth's fleet would be anything more than another doomed line in the sand. Let's teach them some manners, Grissom muttered. Ford didn't hesitate. The Washington vanished. For a fraction of a second, there was nothing. No inertia, no drag, no sense of movement. Then, the ship materialized less than a kilometer behind the Zervash scouts, close enough to register in their sensor-blind spots, but too fast for their targeting systems to recalibrate. Hayes tapped into the enemy comms, voice laced with quiet satisfaction. They don't even know we're here. Grissom nodded. Reynolds, test the graviton disruptors. The engineer grinned. With pleasure. A silent wave of invisible force pulsed outward. The Zervash vessels reacted instantly. Alarms blared in their guttural language as their ships buckled under gravitational distortions, their movement halting mid-maneuver as though caught in molasses. Fire control. Engage, Grissom ordered. The Washington's forward cannons spat pure energy. Not plasma, not conventional beams, but concentrated spatial disruption, bending the very fabric of reality into weaponized force. The first Zervash ship imploded, crushed into itself as the attack rendered its internal structure meaningless. The second ship attempted to retaliate, weapons glowing with unnatural light, but Ford was faster. The quantum displacement drive flickered, and the Washington was suddenly behind them again. Firing solution locked, Sanchez called. Do it. The second ship vanished in a burst of unmaking. The third Zervash vessel attempted to flee. Hayes intercepted their transmission. It was a distress call. Grissom narrowed his eyes. Negative on that, Commander. No survivors. A final pulse from the graviton disruptors, and the last ship crumpled like tin foil. Silence filled the bridge. The battle had lasted 22 seconds. Sanchez exhaled. They never stood a chance. Reynolds shook his head. They're not used to fighting an enemy that doesn't play by their rules. Grissom turned back to the main display, where new blips were forming on the edges of the system. Larger ones. The Zervash had heard their scouts die, and they were coming. Calloway's warning had been ignored. Now, the Galactic Council was out of time. Bring us back to Titan, Grissom ordered. We need to prepare for war. The U.S. Washington slipped into the void above Titan, its hull still humming with residual energy from the quantum displacement jumps. The battle had been swift, brutally efficient, but there was no time for celebration. The Zervash now knew Earth was a threat, and they would not make the same mistake twice. Admiral Wyatt Grissom stood at the holodeble in the war room, arms folded, eyes locked on the data streams cascading across the display. Enemy fleet projections were rapidly evolving. The Zervash weren't merely sending reinforcements, they were mobilizing. The scale of the response was staggering. They're diverting an entire armada, Dr. Miguel Sanchez muttered, scrolling through intercepted communications. Not just a retaliation force. They see us as an existential threat now. Chief Engineer David Brick Reynolds let out a dry chuckle. Good. Means they're scared. Lieutenant Commander Malcolm Hayes wasn't smiling. Scared isn't the word I'd use. Angry, maybe. The Council fleets were nothing but target practice to them. We just showed them a problem they haven't encountered before. Grissom's jaw tightened. Then we make sure they never get the chance to solve it. The door slid open with a soft hiss, and Ambassador Jack Calloway strode in, his uniform still pressed despite the chaos unfolding. His expression was unreadable. The Council's in full-blown panic, Calloway said, skipping pleasantries. Now that their fleets are gone, they're scrambling for a response. They're asking for our help. Reynolds scoffed. After they ignored every damn warning, Calloway met his gaze evenly. They don't have a choice anymore. The Zervash won't stop until there's nothing left. Grissom turned back to the holodeble, fingers tracing the lines of the projected invasion routes. How much time do we have? Sanchez exhaled. If their fleet maintains current velocity, less than 72 hours. Silence settled over the room. Reynolds cracked his knuckles. Then we stop waiting. Olympus is ready, right? Sanchez hesitated. In theory. Calloway arched an eyebrow. And in practice? The scientist sighed. No live combat tests, no long-term sustainability data. If we push it too far, the system could break down in the middle of an engagement. Grissom's gaze was steely. Then we don't push it too far. Ford's voice crackled over the comms. Admiral, we've got incoming. Unidentified vessel dropping out of FTL near Saturn orbit. The room snapped into motion. Grissom activated the primary tactical display, shifting the feed to real-time sensors. A single Zervash warship had emerged from slipspace, holding just outside engagement range. Unlike the sleek, obsidian vessels they had fought before, this one was larger, heavily modified. It was no mere scout. They're watching, Hayes murmured. Calloway narrowed his eyes. Or testing. Grissom turned to Sanchez. Can we jam their comms? The scientist shook his head. Not without exposing our own systems. If they're here to gather intel, they've already done it. Reynolds clenched his fists. Then we send a message of our own. The Washington powered its weapons. For a tense moment, the Zervash vessel remained motionless. Then, without warning, it pivoted and disappeared back into slipspace. Grissom exhaled. They're not engaging. They're reporting back. Calloway's voice was tight. Then, the next fleet won't be here to observe. The countdown had begun. The Zervash fleet arrived like a storm, slipping out of the void in disciplined waves, their dark hulls blotting out the stars. Hundreds of warships, each bristling with weapons honed over centuries of conquest, advanced with terrifying precision. The Galactic Council's forces had been obliterated in mere moments, and now the invaders had come to do the same to Earth's last defenders. Aboard the USS Washington, the bridge was silent, except for the steady hum of systems cycling into combat readiness. Admiral Wyatt Grissom stood at the center, eyes fixed on the vast enemy formation stretching across the holographic display. The sheer numbers were overwhelming. Even with every advantage Earth had developed, this would not be an easy fight. Final system checks are green, Dr. Miguel Sanchez reported, his fingers flying over his console. Olympus is stable. For now. Chief Engineer David Brick Reynolds exhaled through his nose. No turning back. Then, Lieutenant Commander Malcolm Hayes leaned forward, his expression unreadable. They're waiting. The Zervash fleet held position just beyond Saturn's orbit, their lead ships forming a tight spearhead. They weren't charging in blindly. They had studied the battle over Jupiter, dissected the fate of their scouts, and learned. Now they were strategizing. Grissom understood their logic. The Zervash believed Earth was a fluke, a statistical anomaly. They assumed that with preparation, their superior forces would crush any resistance. They were wrong. Ford, Grissom said, turning to the pilot. Take us in. The Washington surged forward, the rest of the Terran fleet following in its wake. Unlike the clumsy, outdated warships of the Galactic Council, these vessels were built for asymmetric warfare. Every system had been designed with one purpose: to defy the laws of conventional combat. As the two forces closed the distance, the Zervash fired first. Lances of emerald plasma streaked through space, converging on the human ships with lethal precision. But the Washington was already gone. In a flicker of distorted space, it reappeared behind the enemy vanguard. Before the Zervash could adjust, the Olympus system activated. A pulse of energy rippled outward, warping reality itself. Zervash shields buckled. Hulls groaned under the weight of gravitational distortions. Then, in an instant, half their formation collapsed in on itself, crushed by forces beyond their comprehension. The Washington didn't stop. Secondary targets locked. Sanchez confirmed. Fire. This time, the weapons struck before the Zervash could even register the attack. Spatial disruption cannons tore through their ranks, each shot unraveling ships at the molecular level. The Zervash, masters of overwhelming force, found themselves utterly outmaneuvered. But they were not without response. A ripple passed through the remaining ships. Their formations shifted, their technology adapting. New energy signatures flared to life as countermeasures activated. The Zervash weren't just reacting, they were evolving. They're learning faster than we expected, Hayes muttered. Grissom didn't flinch. Then we don't give them time to catch up. Reynolds grinned. I was hoping you'd say that. With a roar of engines, the Terran fleet surged forward again. The Zervash adjusted, their weapons recalibrating, but it was too late. The battle had already slipped beyond their control. For the first time in their history, the Zervash were not the predators. They were the prey, and Earth was just getting started.